Shit, I'm late again. I dash out of my apartment, nearly forgetting to lock the door behind me. The crisp autumn air hits my face as I sprint down the sidewalk, my running shoes pounding against the pavement. My name's Elena Cooper, and I'm a year-old screenwriter with a severe case of writer's block and an even worse habit of procrastination. As I round the corner, I catch a glimpse of my reflection in a storefront window. My brunette hair is pulled back in a messy ponytail, and my green eyes are wide with panic. I'm not exactly what you'd call an athlete, but here I am, training for my first marathon. Why? Because apparently, I hate myself. I reach the park just as the group running session is about to start. My lungs are already burning, and we haven't even begun the real workout yet. As I join the crowd of eager runners, I can't help but feel like an imposter. These people look like they were born in running shoes, while I'm still trying to figure out how to tie mine properly. All right, folks, let's warm up with a light jog around the lake. The overly enthusiastic trainer's voice cuts through my self-deprecating thoughts. I fall into step with the group, trying to focus on my breathing, and not on the fact that I'm already winded. As we run, my mind wanders back to the blank document waiting for me on my laptop. The cursor blinks mockingly, reminding me of the deadline looming over my head. I've been staring at that empty page for weeks, unable to string together a coherent sentence. It's like my creativity has packed its bags and gone on an extended vacation without me. Halfway through the run, my phone buzzes in my pocket. I resist the urge to check it, knowing it's probably my agent asking for an update on the script. The thought makes my stomach churn, or maybe that's just the exertion. Either way, I push myself harder, hoping the physical pain will drown out the mental anguish. By the time we finish the session, I'm a sweaty, panting mess. As I cool down, I finally pull out my phone. To my surprise, it's not my agent, but a notification from the running app I downloaded on a whim last week. Someone with the username V has left a comment on my progress post. First marathon? You've got this. Remember, it's not about being the fastest, it's about not giving up. Keep pushing. I can't help but smile at the unexpected encouragement. It's a small gesture, but it feels like a lifeline in the sea of self-doubt I've been drowning in. On a whim, I reply, thanking V for the support. That night, as I sit in front of my laptop, the cursor still blinking accusingly, my phone pings again. It's V responding to my thanks. Before I know it, we're deep in conversation about running techniques, the best energy gels, and the mental challenges of long-distance running. As the night wears on, our chat drifts from running to life in general. There's something freeing about talking to a stranger online, someone who doesn't know about my writer's block or my insecurities. V is funny, insightful, and surprisingly easy to talk to. By the time I glance at the clock, it's well past midnight. I've spent hours chatting with V and haven't written a single word of my script. But for the first time in weeks, I don't feel guilty about it. Instead, I feel inspired. As I get ready for bed, I find myself looking forward to tomorrow's run. And as I drift off to sleep, my mind is filled with ideas for my script, sparked by my conversation with V. Maybe this marathon training isn't such a bad idea after all. Who knows? It might just be the thing to get me out of my creative rut. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change my life in ways I could never have imagined. But that's the thing about marathons and life. You never know what's waiting for you around the next bend. The day of the marathon dawned crisp and clear. A perfect autumn morning in Indianapolis. I stood at the starting line, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the runners next to me could hear it. Months of training, countless conversations with V, and more blisters than I cared to count had led to this moment. As the starting gun fired, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The crowd of runners moved as one, a sea of colorful shirts and determined faces. For the first few miles, I felt invincible. The cheers from the spectators lining the streets filled me with energy, and I found myself grinning like an idiot. But around mile, reality hit me like a sledgehammer. My legs felt like lead, and each breath was a struggle. I started to question every life choice that had led me to this moment of self-inflicted torture. Just as I was considering faking an injury and crawling off the course, I spotted her. About 20 feet ahead of me was a blonde woman who seemed to be struggling even more than I was. Her ponytail swung wildly as she staggered, her pace slowing dangerously. Without thinking, I pushed myself to catch up to her. "Hey," I panted as I reached her side. "You okay?" She turned to look at me, and I was struck by the intensity of her blue eyes. I'm fine, she gasped, but her pale face told a different story. I'm Elena, I said, falling into step beside her. And I think we both know you're not fine. Let's finish this together, yeah? For a moment, I thought she might tell me to piss off. But then she nodded, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Valerie, she managed to say between labored breaths. For the next 11 miles, Valerie and I became a team. We alternated between encouragement and playful insults, pushing each other forward when one of us faltered. I learned she was an actress, currently starring in a local theater production. In return, I shared my struggles as a screenwriter. As we approached the final mile, the skies opened up. Rain poured down, soaking us to the bone in seconds. But instead of feeling miserable, I started laughing. Valerie looked at me like I'd lost my mind, then joined in. Come on, I shouted over the sound of the rain and the cheering crowd. Let's show this marathon who's boss. With a burst of energy we didn't know we had left, Valerie and I sprinted towards the finish line. As we crossed together, hands clasped and raised in victory, I felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the marathon. Breathless and giddy, we stumbled to a stop in the finishers area. Volunteers draped mylar blankets over our shoulders, but I barely noticed. I was too busy staring at Valerie, watching raindrops cling to her eyelashes. We did it, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Hell yeah, we did, I replied, grinning like a fool. Before I could overthink it, I leaned in and kissed her. Her lips were soft despite the chill of the rain, and for a moment, the world around us faded away. When we parted, Valerie's eyes were wide with surprise, but she was smiling. That was unexpected, she said, a blush creeping up her cheeks. Sorry, I mumbled, suddenly feeling self-conscious. I got caught up in the moment. Valerie's laugh was like music. Don't apologize. I'm glad you did it. I was trying to work up the courage myself. We stood there, grinning at each other like idiots, until a race official ushered us towards the medal ceremony. As we walked, Valerie slipped her hand into mine. The post-race celebration was a blur of excitement and fatigue. Valerie and I stuck together, trading stories and stealing glances. As the adrenaline wore off, we found ourselves huddled under an awning, shivering in our wet clothes. I should probably head home and get warm, Valerie said, though she made no move to leave. Yeah, me too, I agreed, equally reluctant to end our time together. We exchanged numbers, promising to meet up for coffee once we'd recovered from the race. As I watched Valerie disappear into the crowd, I felt a mix of elation and sadness. I'd just run my first marathon and kissed a beautiful woman. But now I was heading back to my empty apartment and my unfinished script. That night, as I soaked in a hot bath to ease my aching muscles, my phone pinged. It was a message from V on the running app, congratulating me on finishing the marathon. I smiled, grateful for the support that had gotten me through my training. As I typed out a reply, my mind wandered to Valerie. I couldn't wait to see her again, to explore whatever this spark between us might become. Little did I know, my journey was far from over, and the finish line I'd crossed that day was just the beginning of a much more complicated race. The days following the marathon were a whirlwind of emotions and sore muscles. Valerie and I met for coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into long walks in the park. I found myself falling hard and fast, captivated by her wit, her passion for theater, and the way her blue eyes crinkled when she laughed. But as my relationship with Valerie blossomed in the real world, my online friendship with V deepened in the digital realm. Late at night, when Valerie was busy with rehearsals, I'd find myself pouring my heart out to V. We'd talk about everything from our hopes and fears to our favorite movies and books. There was an ease to our conversations, a depth that I couldn't quite explain. I told myself it was harmless. After all, V was just a username on a screen, right? But deep down, I knew I was playing a dangerous game. I was developing feelings for two people at once, and the guilt was eating me alive. One evening, as Valerie and I cuddled on my couch, my phone buzzed with a message from V. I quickly silenced it, but not before Valerie noticed. Secret admirer? She teased, raising an eyebrow. I forced a laugh. Just someone from the running app. They've been helping me with training tips. Valerie nodded, but I could see a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I changed the subject quickly, asking about her latest rehearsal. As Valerie launched into a story about her director's latest meltdown, my mind wandered. I thought about how different my conversations with Valerie and V were. With Valerie, everything was exciting and new, full of physical chemistry and shared experiences. With V, it was all intellectual and emotional connection. Deep discussions that left me feeling understood in a way I never had before. A few days later, I received an email that made my heart stop. My agent had sold my script, the one I'd been struggling with for months, to a local theater company. And the lead role? It was going to Valerie. I stared at the email in disbelief. This was amazing news, a dream come true. But as the initial shock wore off, a sense of dread settled in my stomach. How was I going to navigate this? Working closely with Valerie while harboring this secret online relationship? I called Valerie immediately, my voice shaking with excitement as I shared the news. She screamed with joy, her enthusiasm infectious. We agreed to meet for dinner to celebrate. That night, as we clinked glasses over a candlelit table, I pushed aside my guilt and focused on the moment. Valerie was radiant, her eyes shining with excitement about the role. "I can't believe I get to bring your words to life," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "It's like the universe brought us together for a reason." I smiled, ignoring the twinge in my chest. If only she knew how complicated things really were. As we left the restaurant, Valerie pulled me into a kiss that left me breathless. For a moment, all thoughts of V vanished from my mind. This was real, tangible. Valerie was here, in my arms, warm and alive. But later that night, as I lay in bed, my phone lit up with a message from V. My heart raced as I opened it, guilt and excitement warring in my chest. "Hey stranger, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I should end this, I thought, focus on what I have with Valerie, but instead, I found myself typing a reply. "Sorry, been busy with work. My script got picked up by a theater company." V's response was immediate and enthusiastic. We fell into our usual easy banter, and before I knew it, hours had passed. As I finally set my phone aside, I felt a familiar mix of contentment and shame. The next few weeks were a blur of rehearsals, script revisions, and stolen moments with Valerie. I threw myself into the production, grateful for the distraction from my conflicted feelings. Watching Valerie bring my character to life was intoxicating, and I found myself falling even deeper for her. But every night, without fail, I'd find myself messaging V. It had become a habit, a secret indulgence I couldn't seem to break. Then came the night that changed everything. I was at the theater late, working on some last-minute script changes. Valerie had left hours ago, but I heard footsteps approaching my makeshift office. "Forget something?" I called out, assuming it was Valerie. But the woman who appeared in the doorway wasn't Valerie. She was identical to her in every way, except for the knowing smile on her face. "Hello, Elena," she said. "I'm Andrea, Valerie's twin sister, but you might know me better as V." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at Andrea, my mind reeling. The similarities between her and Valerie were uncanny, right down to the mischievous glint in her blue eyes. I don't understand," I stammered, even though a part of me was already putting the pieces together. Andrea leaned against the doorframe, her expression a mix of amusement and something else I couldn't quite read. "I think you do. I'm the one you've been talking to online for months. The one you've been pouring your heart out to while dating my sister." The reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been unknowingly caught in a web of my own making, torn between twin sisters. As I sat there, staring at Andrea, I realized that my comfortable double life was about to come crashing down around me. "We need to talk," Andrea said, her voice soft but firm. "About Valerie, about us, about everything." As she pulled up a chair, I knew that whatever happened next would change all of our lives forever. The story I thought I was writing had just taken an unexpected turn, and I had no idea how it was going to end. The rehearsal space felt like it was closing in on me as Andrea sat down. Her presence was a mirror image of Valerie, yet distinctly different. The air crackled with tension as we faced each other, the weight of our digital intimacy hanging between us. "So," Andrea began, her voice eerily similar to Valerie's, "I suppose we should address the elephant in the room." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I had no idea. About you being Valerie's sister, I mean. Andrea's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "Clearly. Though I'm not sure if that makes this situation better or worse." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, the ticking of the wall clock echoing loudly in the empty theater. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Why?" I blurted out. Why did you keep talking to me once you knew I was dating Valerie? Andrea's eyes, so like her sister's, clouded with emotion. I didn't mean for it to go this far. At first, I was just curious about the woman my sister couldn't stop talking about. But then, I got to know you. The real you. The one behind the words on the page and the smiles at rehearsals. Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been so caught up in my own internal struggle that I hadn't considered the possibility that Andrea might be developing feelings too. This is so messed up, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Andrea nodded, a sad smile playing on her lips. Tell me about it. I've spent my whole life in Valerie's shadow. The quiet twin, the one who writes instead of performs. And then you came along and for once, someone saw me, really saw me. The raw honesty in her voice made my heart ache. I understood all too well the feeling of being truly seen, of finding a connection that goes beyond the surface. It was what had drawn me to our late-night conversations, what had kept me coming back despite my growing relationship with Valerie. What do we do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Before Andrea could answer, the door to the rehearsal room burst open. Valerie strode in, her face lighting up when she saw me. But her smile faltered as she noticed Andrea. Andrea, what are you doing here? Valerie's voice was laced with confusion and a hint of suspicion. I watched as the sisters locked eyes, an unspoken conversation passing between them. The air in the room grew thick with tension, and I felt like I was suffocating. I came to meet the woman behind the script, Andrea said smoothly, but I could hear the slight tremor in her voice. Valerie's eyes narrowed. At midnight? In an empty theater? I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. I was just doing some last-minute rewrites. Andrea stopped by and we got to talking about the script. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to shatter Valerie's world. Not yet, not like this. Valerie seemed to relax slightly, but there was still a wariness in her posture. Well, since we're all here, why don't we run through the new changes? The next hour was excruciating. We went through the script, with Valerie performing and Andrea and I offering feedback. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here we were, working on a play about love and deception, while living out our own tangled drama. As we wrapped up, Valerie turned to me with a smile that made my guilt intensify. Want to grab a late dinner? I'm starving after all this work. I glanced at Andrea, who was studiously avoiding my gaze. Actually, I'm pretty beat. Rain check? Valerie's face fell slightly, but she nodded. Of course. Get some rest, superstar writer. As Valerie gathered her things, Andrea caught my eye. The look we shared was heavy with unspoken words and complicated emotions. Once Valerie had left, Andrea and I stood in uncomfortable silence. Finally, she spoke. We can't keep doing this, Elena. It's not fair to any of us. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I know, but I don't know how to fix it without hurting everyone. Andrea stepped closer, her hand reaching out as if to touch me before falling back to her side. Sometimes, hurt is inevitable. We just have to decide what's worth fighting for. With that, she turned and walked out of the rehearsal room, leaving me alone with my tumultuous thoughts. The next few days were a blur of rehearsals and rewrites. I threw myself into the work, desperate to avoid confronting the mess I'd created. Valerie noticed my distraction, her concern evident in the worried glances she shot my way. During a particularly intense scene, Valerie flubbed her lines for the third time in a row. Frustration etched across her face. She turned to me. What's going on with you, Elena? You've been off ever since that night with Andrea. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? Valerie's blue eyes, so like her sister's, bore into mine. You're distant, distracted. It's like you're here, but you're not really here. Is there something going on between you and Andrea? The accusation hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. I opened my mouth to deny it, to brush off her concerns, but the words wouldn't come. In that moment of hesitation, I saw the realization dawn in Valerie's eyes. Oh my gosh, she whispered, taking a step back. There is, isn't there? The pain in her voice was like a knife to my heart. Valerie, it's not what you think. It's complicated. But Valerie was already backing away, shaking her head. I can't believe this. I need some air. She stormed out of the theater, leaving me standing alone on the stage, the weight of my decisions crushing down on me. As I sank to the floor, my head in my hands, I realized that the delicate balance I'd been trying to maintain had finally tipped. The curtain had risen on the final act of our real-life drama, and I had no idea how it would end. The days leading up to opening night were a special kind of hell. Valerie was barely speaking to me, delivering her lines with a cold professionalism that made my heart ache. Andrea had disappeared completely, leaving a void in my inbox and an emptiness in my chest I couldn't quite explain. As I sat in the darkened theater, watching the final dress rehearsal, I marveled at how quickly everything had fallen apart. The play that was supposed to be my triumphant debut as a playwright now felt like a twisted mirror of my own mess of a life. "Places for the final scene," the director called out, his voice echoing through the auditorium. I watched as Valerie took her position on stage, her blonde hair gleaming under the spotlight. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. She was hurting, and it was all my fault. As she began to deliver her final monologue, I was struck by the raw emotion in her voice. This wasn't just acting, she was channeling her own pain into the performance. Her words, my words, took on new meaning as they fell from her lips. "Love isn't always a choice," Valerie's character declared, her voice trembling. "Sometimes it's a force that sweeps you off your feet, leaving you breathless and confused. And sometimes it's a slow burn, a connection that builds over time until you can't imagine your life without it." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Gosh, what had I done? I'd managed to hurt not just one but two incredible women. And for what? Because I was too cowardly to make a choice? As the final scene came to a close, the small audience of crew members erupted into applause. Valerie took a small bow, her eyes scanning the seats until they landed on me. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the warmth that used to be there, but it was quickly replaced by a guarded expression. I made my way backstage, hoping to catch her alone, to try and explain. But as I rounded the corner, I came face to face with Andrea instead. "Hey," she said softly, her presence both a comfort and a complication. "Andrea," I breathed, relief and anxiety warring in my chest. "Where have you been?" She shrugged, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Giving you space. Giving myself space. This isn't exactly an easy situation for any of us." Before I could respond, Valerie's voice cut through the air. "What the hell is this?" We turned to see her standing in the doorway, still in her costume, her eyes darting between Andrea and me. The hurt and betrayal on her face was like a physical blow. "Valerie, please," I started, but she held up a hand to stop me. "No, I want to hear this from my sister," Valerie said, her voice cold. "What exactly is going on between you two?" Andrea stepped forward, her posture defensive. "It's not what you think, Val. Elena and I, we connected online, before she even met you. I didn't know who she was at first, and by the time you figured it out, you decided to keep talking to her anyway?" Valerie finished, her voice rising. "While she was dating me?" The tension in the small backstage area was unbearable. I felt like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion, powerless to stop it. "I'm sorry," Andrea said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I fell for her too." Valerie's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Of course you did. Because God forbid I have something you don't, right? You always have to take what's mine." "That's not fair, Val," Andrea protested, but Valerie was already turning her anger towards me. "And you," she spat, her blue eyes flashing with hurt and rage. "I trusted you. I let you in, I shared my life with you. And all this time, you were what? Stringing us both along?" I felt my chest tighten, the weight of my actions crushing down on me. "Valerie, please, it wasn't like that. I care about you both. I got lost." "Lost?" Valerie scoffed. "Well, consider this your wake-up call. The show opens tomorrow night. After that, I never want to see either of you again." With that, she stormed out, leaving Andrea and me standing in stunned silence. As the reality of what had just happened sank in, I felt my knees go weak. Andrea reached out to steady me, her touch both comforting and electric. "What have we done?" I whispered, leaning into her support despite myself. Andrea's arms wrapped around me, and I felt her sigh against my hair. "We made a mess, that's what. But Elena, I can't bring myself to regret getting to know you." I pulled back slightly, meeting her gaze. The emotion I saw there mirrored my own conflicted feelings. "What do we do now?" Before Andrea could answer, the director's voice boomed through the backstage area. "All right, people. Final notes and then get some rest. Tomorrow's the big night." Reality came crashing back in. The show, Valerie's ultimatum, the impossible choice looming before me. As I made my way home that night, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions and what-ifs. I'd poured my heart into this play, into these relationships. Now, on the eve of what should have been my greatest triumph, everything was falling apart. I knew that whatever happened tomorrow night would change all of our lives forever. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder, was there any way to salvage this mess? Or had I already lost everything that mattered? With opening night looming and my heart torn in two, I closed my eyes, praying for a clarity that seemed impossibly out of reach. Opening night came and went in a blur of applause and forced smiles. Valerie's performance was electric, her pain and anger fueling a raw intensity that left the audience breathless. I stood in the wings, watching her pour her heart out on stage, using my words to express emotions I never intended. As the final curtain fell, I felt a hole open up in my chest. This should have been a moment of triumph, but instead, it felt like the end of everything. Valerie disappeared immediately after the curtain call, leaving me standing alone in the emptying theater. I couldn't face the after-party, couldn't bear the congratulations and small talk. Instead, I found myself wandering the streets of Indianapolis, the cold November air biting at my cheeks. My feet carried me to the park where I'd trained for the marathon, where this whole mess had started. For days, I threw myself into running, pushing my body to its limits as if I could somehow outrun my problems. I ignored calls from my agent, from Andrea, from everyone. The only company I wanted was the rhythmic pounding of my feet against the pavement and the burn in my lungs. One particularly brutal morning, as snow began to fall, I pushed myself harder than ever before. My breath came in ragged gasps, visible in the frigid air. I was so focused on the path ahead that I didn't notice the figure approaching until it was too late. "Elena!" Valerie's voice cut through the silence, startling me so badly I nearly tripped. I skidded to a stop, my heart pounding from more than just exertion. Valerie stood before me, bundled up against the cold, her blue eyes bright against the snowy backdrop. "What are you doing here?" I panted, trying to catch my breath. Valerie's expression was a mix of determination and vulnerability. "Looking for you. You've been avoiding everyone and I needed to talk to you." I nodded, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt in my running gear. Can we go somewhere warm?" 20 minutes later, we were sitting in my apartment, mugs of steaming coffee clutched in our hands. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Valerie spoke. "I'm still angry with you. What you did, it hurt me more than I can express." I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I know, I'm so sorry, Valerie. I never meant to." "Let me finish," she interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'm angry but I also miss you. These past few weeks not talking to you, it's been hell." I looked up then, hope fluttering in my chest. "I've missed you too. So much." Valerie set her mug down, her eyes searching mine. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us, about Andrea, about everything. And I realized something. I fell in love with you, Elena. Not just the parts you showed me, but all of you. Including the parts you shared with Andrea." My breath caught in my throat. "Valerie, She held up a hand, silencing me. "I'm not saying I forgive you, not yet, but I want to understand. I want to know why you felt you couldn't be honest with me." And so I told her everything. About my insecurities as a writer, about the deep connection I'd formed with V before I even knew who she was, about how I'd been too afraid to lose either of them, and ended up hurting everyone in the process. As I spoke, Valerie listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finally fell silent, she reached out and took my hand. "Thank you for being honest with me," she said softly. "I can't say it makes everything okay, but it helps." Before I could respond, she leaned in and kissed me. It was soft and tentative, nothing like our passionate embraces from before, but it held a promise of something new, something that might be even stronger than what we had before. When we parted, I could see the conflict in Valerie's eyes. "I don't know where we go from here," she admitted, "but I know I'm not ready to give up on us." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a pang of guilt as I thought of Andrea. "What about your sister?" I asked hesitantly. Valerie sighed, running a hand through her hair. That's complicated. I'm still hurt by what she did, but she's my sister. We'll figure it out. But right now, I want to focus on us, on rebuilding what we had. As the snow continued to fall outside, Valerie and I talked for hours. We laughed, we cried, we argued. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. That night, as we lay tangled together in my bed, I marveled at the twists and turns that had brought us to this moment. Our bodies moved together with a newfound intensity, each touch an affirmation of the bond we were fighting to preserve. In the quiet aftermath, as Valerie's breathing evened out in sleep, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I knew we still had a long way to go. There were still conversations to be had, trust to be rebuilt. And Andrea. I couldn't ignore the pang in my heart when I thought of her. But for now, I allowed myself to bask in the warmth of Valerie's embrace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: I was done running. It was time to face my feelings, my mistakes, and the consequences of my actions head on. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to myself and to the woman beside me. No more hiding, no more half-truths. From now on, it would be all or nothing. And I was ready to give my all. The morning after my reconciliation with Valerie, I woke to the gentle buzz of my phone. It was a message from Andrea. We need to talk. Dinner tonight? The three of us. My heart raced as I showed the message to Valerie. Her face tightened, but she nodded. It's time we all cleared the air, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. That evening, we gathered at a quiet Italian restaurant, the kind of place where the low lighting and private booths seemed designed for difficult conversations. Andrea was already there when we arrived, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her water glass. Hey, she said softly, her eyes darting between Valerie and me. We sat down, an uncomfortable silence settling over the table. The waiter appeared, and we ordered quickly, more to have something to do than out of actual hunger. Finally, Andrea spoke. I owe you both an apology. Val, I never meant to come between you and Elena. And Elena, I shouldn't have continued our. Whatever it was, once I knew you were with my sister. Valerie's knuckles were white as she gripped her napkin. Why did you then? She asked, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Andrea's eyes met mine briefly before focusing on her sister. Because I felt seen for the first time in my life. Not as your twin, not as the quiet writer in the background, but as me. And I was selfish. I didn't want to give that up. I felt a lump form in my throat. Andrea, She held up a hand, cutting me off. Let me finish. What I did was wrong, I know that. But I can't regret getting to know you, Elena. You've made me realize what I want in a partner, in a relationship. And as much as it hurts, I know that partner isn't you. The weight of her words hung in the air. I felt Valerie's hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently. So where does this leave us? Valerie asked, her voice softer now. Andrea took a deep breath. I love you both. You're my sister, Val and Elena. You've become important to me too. I don't want to lose either of you from my life. But I also know we need time to heal, to rebuild trust. As we talked, picking at our food more than eating it, I felt a shift in the air. The tension began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. We laughed about shared memories, cried over the pain we'd caused each other, and slowly, tentatively, began to forge a new kind of relationship. By the time dessert arrived, a plan had started to take shape. Andrea would take some time away, focus on her writing. Valerie and I would continue to work on our relationship, with the understanding that trust would take time to rebuild. And the play? We decided to give it new life. Together, the three of us would revise the script, turning it into a story of love, betrayal, and ultimately, forgiveness. It would be our way of processing what had happened, of turning our pain into art. As we left the restaurant, Andrea hugged us both. I'm going to be okay, she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. We're all going to be okay. Watching her walk away, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Valerie squeezed my hand, pulling me close. Let's go home, she whispered. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and hard work. Valerie and I spent our days rewriting the play, pouring our experiences into the characters. Our nights were filled with long conversations, working through our issues one by one. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of lingering hurt. But with each day, each honest conversation, we grew stronger. I found myself falling in love with Valerie all over again, appreciating her strength, her capacity for forgiveness. Andrea kept in touch via email, sharing her progress on her own writing projects. Her messages were friendly but reserved, a reminder of the boundaries we'd all agreed to respect. As we approached the final rehearsals for the revised play, I felt a nervous energy building. This wasn't just a story anymore, it was our story, laid bare for the world to see. The night before the first performance, Valerie and I stayed late at the theater, running through last-minute changes. As we stood on the empty stage, the ghost light casting long shadows, Valerie turned to me. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, thinking about everything we'd been through. "I think so. Are you?" Instead of answering, she pulled me close and kissed me. It was a kiss full of promise, of a future we were building together. When we parted, she rested her forehead against mine. "As long as we're together, I'm ready for anything." The next evening, as the cast and crew gathered for the opening night, I felt a surge of nervous excitement. Andrea had sent a good luck message to both of us, and her words echoed in my mind, "Break a leg, I'm proud of you both." As the lights dimmed and the audience fell silent, I squeezed Valerie's hand one last time before she took her place on stage. Standing in the wings, watching the story of our love, betrayal, and redemption unfold, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We'd made mistakes, all of us. We'd hurt each other and ourselves. But we'd also found a way forward, a way to turn our pain into something beautiful. As Valerie delivered the final lines of the play, her voice ringing out clear and strong, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Our story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The applause that erupted as the curtain fell felt like more than just appreciation for a performance. It felt like absolution, like a new chapter opening before us. And as Valerie ran off stage and into my arms, her face flushed with triumph, I knew that this was where I belonged. Not in the shadows of indecision, but here in the light, with the woman I loved. "We did it," she whispered, her eyes shining. "We did," I replied, pulling her close. "And we're just getting started." A year has passed since that fateful opening night, and here I am again, lacing up my running shoes at the starting line of the Indianapolis Marathon. But this time, everything is different. Valerie stands beside me, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, her blue eyes sparkling with excitement. We've spent the past year training together, pushing each other to our limits, both on the running trail and in our relationship. "Ready for this?" she asks, bumping her shoulder against mine. I grin, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "Born ready. You?" She winks at me. "Try to keep up, slowpoke." As we wait for the starting gun, I can't help but marvel at how much has changed. The play we rewrote together became a surprise hit, touring several cities and even garnering interest from Broadway producers. But more importantly, it helped us heal, to understand each other in ways we never had before. Andrea found her own path too. She moved to New York to pursue her writing career, and last we heard, she was dating a talented female director she met at a writer's workshop. The distance has been good for all of us, allowing old wounds to heal and new relationships to form. The starting gun fires and we're off. Valerie and I fall into an easy rhythm, our strides matching as we navigate the familiar streets of Indianapolis. We pass the park where we first met, the theater where our story unfolded, the restaurant where we had that painful but necessary dinner with Andrea. Each landmark is a reminder of our journey, of the obstacles we've overcome and the love we've fought to preserve. As we hit the halfway mark, I feel a familiar burn in my muscles. But this time, instead of doubt and fear, I'm filled with determination. Valerie must sense it because she flashes me a grin. "Still with me, babe?" I nod, too breathless for words. We push on, encouraging each other with silent glances and gentle touches. This is what we've become. A team, stronger together than we ever were apart. The final miles are grueling, but we've prepared for this. As we round the last corner, the finish line in sight, Valerie grabs my hand. Together, we sprint the last 100 yards, crossing the finish line as one. Breathless and sweaty, we collapse into each other's arms. The crowd around us cheers, but all I can focus on is Valerie's radiant smile. "We did it," she pants, her forehead resting against mine. "We sure did," I reply, my heart swelling with pride and love. As we make our way through the finisher's chute, accepting our medals and water bottles, I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turn to find Andrea standing there, a proud smile on her face. "Surprise," she says, pulling us both into a hug. "I couldn't miss this." The three of us stand there, laughing and crying, attracting curious glances from the other runners. But I don't care. This moment, imperfect as it is, feels like a victory greater than any marathon. Later, at the post-race celebration, I find a quiet moment alone with Valerie. The setting sun paints the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, reminding me of that first kiss in the rain after our first marathon. "Val," I say, my heart racing faster than it did during the race, "there's something I need to ask you." She turns to me, her eyes curious. "What is it?" I take a deep breath, reaching into my pocket. "This past year has been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. You've pushed me to be better, to face my fears, to love more deeply than I ever thought possible." Valerie's eyes widen as I drop to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Valerie Clark, will you marry me?" For a moment, the world stands still. Then, with tears in her eyes, Valerie nods. "Yes," she whispers, 1,000 times yes. As I slip the ring onto her finger, cheers erupt around us. Andrea is the first to reach us, enveloping us both in a tight hug. "It's about damn time," she laughs, wiping away her own tears. Standing there, surrounded by friends and family, with Valerie in my arms and our whole future ahead of us, I feel a sense of completeness I've never known before. This isn't the end of our story. In many ways, it's just the beginning. There will be more challenges to face, more marathons to run, both literal and figurative. But I know now that with Valerie by my side, there's nothing we can't overcome. As the celebration continues around us, Valerie leans in close. "So, Ryder," she whispers, her breath warm against my ear, "what's the next chapter of our story?" I grin, pulling her closer. "I don't know," I admit, "but I can't wait to find out." And as the sun sets on this chapter of our lives, I realize that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones we write together, one step at a time.